Hi, I'm Calivan. Today we're going to give the Lamplighters League a proper review because I think it's a pretty good game and has been overlooked by a lot of people. I've spoken about it in passing a few times before, but now that I've got something like 40 hours of playtime under my belt, I feel like I'm finally in a position to actually give it a fair and detailed breakdown. So what is the Lamplighters League? Well, I think it's best described as a turn-based tactics game that anyone who's played the more recent XCOM games will be immediately familiar with. Thematically, it's set in an early 20th century universe and draws influences from steampunk, adventure serials and Lovecraftian horror. As members of the Lamplighters League, your task is to combat the Banished Court, a shady underworld evil organisation who are close to achieving their goal of world domination. It's a lot more story focused than something like XCOM. The game is rammed full of lore and world building, and rather than controlling a group of dynamically generated soldiers, each of your agents is unique with their own story, abilities and goals. It was created by Harebrained Schemes, the makers of 2018's Battletech. Unfortunately, the development was problematic. It was poorly marketed, really poorly marketed, and it performed so badly on release that the publisher, Paradox Interactive, parted ways with Harebrained and everyone pretty much washed their hands of the whole thing. However troublesome it was, the game did have a proper release and a few patches to fix the most glaring of issues. Although I doubt we'll ever see any more DLC or a sequel, it is a complete finished product that's available on the Steam store today, and one that I think should not be overlooked. The game has a computer animated aesthetic that is very reminiscent of something like a modern Pixar movie, but I wouldn't go as far to call it childish. It's a suitable look for the fantastical world that the game takes place in, and you quickly find yourself feeling very comfortable within it. The character models and their interactions with the world are well executed, and the scenery around you is highly detailed and quite nice to look at. It's very easy to distinguish the difference between interactable areas and set dressing, with important objects being well highlighted, leading to an experience that's quite easy on the eyes. Ever present in the backdrop is the soundtrack, which is excellent and does a lot to reinforce both the time period and the setting. There are elements of jazz interspersed with adventure themes and touches of orchestral composition, which serve as a fitting backdrop to the world of moonlit rooftops, mystical temples and occult hideouts in which the game takes place in. It's composed by John Everest, who I think has done a fantastic job in this regard and is really something to be celebrated. The combat engine itself is designed around each agent having 2 action points. These action points can be either used for moving, attacking or using abilities, but unlike XCOM, using an attack ability won't automatically end your turn. There are, of course, plenty of exceptions to all of this. Agents are highly customizable, and there are a lot of complex interactions available to you during gameplay. However, before you actually get to the turn-based combat engine, the game does feature a real-time exploration mode before and between battles that you can use to navigate the map, pick up items and get into favourable positions before the enemy is alerted and the fighting starts. Each agent has 2 or 3 charges of something called a takedown ability that they can use in this real-time mode. Many of the general enemies you face are vulnerable to these, and it's possible to thin out the hordes before they become alerted by sneaking up and using these charges. In this mode, enemies have a detection radius around or in front of them, and if used effectively, you can seriously reduce the difficulty of a fight and sometimes avoid a fight altogether. The agents themselves are all very different, although they do come under one of 3 main archetypes: bruisers, sneaks and saboteurs. The archetype determines what sort of real-time takedown method is available to them, but also has a few additional benefits outside of combat. Bruisers can break down special walls, sneaks can climb ropes and vines, and saboteurs can pick locks, all of which open up new areas or pathways through the map. None of these things are mission critical, but having a diverse team does usually give you more options and better loot. Sneaks are also better at, well, sneaking, and you can use them to scout out the enemy locations before you decide to engage. Once the fighting does start in earnest, all of the baddies in the vicinity will move to attack you. Unlike XCOM, where you must carefully position yourself to only fight one pod at a time, you tend to take on an entire room or area at once in the Lamplighters League. You don't have to really worry about triggering additional enemies by accidentally running one square too many in a certain direction, which is probably for the best because the combat is hard enough as it is. The maps in which you do battle are quite varied, and I found myself surprised that most of my missions didn't take place in the same handful of locations. There are forest encampments, Parisian rooftops, ancient desert temples, dockyards, factories, museums and a whole lot more. They're well crafted, and although you often have to explore the majority of each location, they aren't exactly linear. There are normally several different routes to take, and you can use the real-time mode to actually skip some of the fights if you're careful. Although the generic missions do end up reusing the same map once or twice, all of the critical campaign deployments take place on larger, more complicated maps that are totally unique. There is a lot of flavour in these backdrops, and they include plenty of lore items for you to inspect and read if you want to know more detail about the characters and the world. The maps also include a variety of hazards that you can use to your advantage, including exploding crates, patches of water that you can electrify, and oil slicks that you can ignite. You can interact with these and other items to give yourself real advantages in combat, and their proper usage is almost a necessity in the more difficult encounters. Although the first dozen missions can be completed without too much stress, the difficulty does really ramp up pretty quickly after then, and by the time you're 15 or so missions in, you have to use everything in your power to escape unscathed. These aren't fights that you can just breeze through by moving to cover and attacking every turn. You have to very carefully plan every move and use all of the abilities, interactions and consumables at your disposal to come out on top. This is not a game for the faint-hearted, and I think even experienced aficionados of the genre will find themselves forced to reload a mission with some degree of frequency. I initially found this frustrating, but as my level of knowledge improved and I started to get a better understanding of the interactions available, I started to really enjoy the challenge. The fact that success was by no means a guarantee meant that completing a mission in a satisfactory way was really rewarding, and when I discovered a new tactic or a new way to approach a problem, I was pretty pleased with myself. The missions themselves are linked together by a long-running campaign that takes place on the world map. Your adversary is made up of three great houses, Martu, Nicastro and Strom. These houses are working together to try and bring about world domination through an ancient and powerful magic contained within a distant tower. Each mission represents an attempt to thwart their progress, while also providing you with valuable assets to help your cause, in the form of agents, allies, supplies and intelligence. Every so often, special critical missions will appear on the map that help bring the story to a close, and when all of these are completed, the power of the Banished Court will be diminished and their plans will be brought to an abrupt end. It plays out a little like War of the Chosen, apart from the fact there are 3 doomsday clocks running to represent the 3 great houses and their quest to unlock the secrets of the tower. Completing certain missions or events reduces the progress of one or more of these timers, and in some missions you will actually be battling the leaders of those houses, who will of course retreat rather than suffer a final death. In any of these turn-based tactical games, the doomsday clock on the strategic map is pretty threatening, but having 3 to worry about is somewhat of a nightmarish proposition. You have to think really carefully about what missions you decide to run, and it can feel a little frustrating. To its credit, it does keep the story progressing at a good pace, and it does bring some real importance to the strategy side of the game, giving it an actual purpose rather than just a loose framework to hang missions from. The campaign itself is divided into weeks, and each week consists of a single mission, some side jobs, and sometimes an additional event that requires a decision. The events are normally just a bit of flavour. Sometimes they reward you with additional resources, and sometimes you are just forced to spend some of your resources to prevent a detrimental effect. There are normally 2 or 3 side jobs that you can interact with. You generally pick one of your free agents and assign them to search a safe house or try and gather some intel. This will automatically complete by the following week and either grant you some resources, items or unlock a special mission. There are also the main missions where you must send a team to try and slow down your opposition or develop the story further, and once you pick and complete the main mission, the game advances to the next week. It seems that with most missions you're able to bring 3 agents along, although the more critical jobs allow you to expand your team to 4. Some of the side jobs do result in a recruitment mission that if completed give you an extra agent to work with, or an ally that can provide powerful buffs and equipment. More on them later. Between missions you can improve your agents by spending the skill points that are awarded from completion of missions and events. Skill points are global, so you can spend them on anyone and they do greatly improve each agent, offering additional abilities and improving the starting ones. As each agent is unique, no 2 of them share the same skill tree, so there's quite a lot of options when choosing where to spend your points and what to spend them on. Generally I invested most of my skill points into my 4 or 5 favourite agents and then used them every week. Working alongside the skill tree is a secondary advancement system that all of the agents share. At the end of each mission, you're presented with a selection of skill cards which you can assign to agents or use to improve the cards they already have. Picking the right cards for the right agent is absolutely essential, and the difference they make is very noticeable. It takes a bit of trial and error to get things right in this regard, and the game doesn't give you a lot of direction, but in my own experience I was able to correct my earlier mistakes and get things in a good place by the time I really needed them. Some of the people you recruit aren't agents themselves, but are instead allies that enable additional bonuses or unlock new items that you can spend your resources on. Some of these are simple one-time use affairs such as various grenades and medical supplies, and some are items that you can equip to improve an agent. As well as up to 3 pocket slots for consumables, each agent can carry a weapon mod, some armour and an inventory slot, which all provide a myriad of bonuses. There is real depth in the agent system. When you combine the skill tree with the cards, consumables, ally abilities and equipment, you have a huge amount of customization, and you do feel like you've got a lot of agency in this regard. Perhaps a little too much. It does feel quite convoluted and isn't always well explained. It took me a long time to properly understand all of the resources and upgrade paths, and I'm quite looking forward to a second playthrough in which I actually know how to play the game properly. If this sounds like a criticism, it's because it is. There are far too many paths and choices presented, and I feel like agent progression and customization is about twice as complicated as it really needs to be. This is a problem compounded by the lack of information available online in terms of guides and other support, unfortunately as a result of the game's poor sales performance. Now, the game isn't without its faults, and although I didn't find anything serious enough to make me stop playing, there were a few problems that I did constantly run into during my play sessions. The first can best described as a little lack of polish. Don't get me wrong, for most part the game looks and feels great, but when you occasionally find your agent confused by the real-time pathfinding and continually vaulting back and forward over the same box, you do shake your head a little. There are all sorts of little bits like this, stuff that could have been easily resolved with a bit more time and playtesting. I think the most frustrating of these is the suggested targeting when you press the attack button. One of my key agents, Eddie, has an ability that lets me choose 4 to 6 targets for a quick shot on each, and the game continually suggests that I shoot the crate of explosives that I'm standing next to as a primary target. Now that I'm more familiar with the game, I know to be careful when using this ability, but I've blown up my whole team more than once as a result of this. These 2 examples aren't the only things I ran into, but they are indicative of the kind of problems you'll find with the game. They can be a bit frustrating, especially near the start, but they're not game breaking, and once you're familiar with things you can generally avoid them for the most part. Despite the bugs, the ever nagging doomsday clocks and the difficulty of the missions, I've found myself really enjoying the Lamplighters League. It hasn't pushed XCOM 2 War of the Chosen off the top spot, but it's still a very solid game, and there are some things it does better. I think the story elements are really well executed. The world building, characters, setting and soundtrack are all top notch and expertly crafted. The Lamplighters League is not a perfect game, but it's unique, interesting, enjoyable and challenging, and I think it would be a worthwhile addition to the collection of any fan of the genre. If you like turn-based tactical games, and you love a challenge, and you don't mind overlooking a few little problems, then I highly recommend the Lamplighters League. It's a great game that's highly underrated, and I think it's worth your attention. So give it a try, I don't think you'll be disappointed. Like I said, it's not perfect, but I think it's probably a strong 8 out of 10. Hi there, if you've played the Lamplighters League then I'd love to know how you got on with it, so let me know in a comment. As usual, if you enjoyed this video please click the like button, and if you want more of this sort of thing then subscribe to my channel and I hope to see you back soon.